I mean, come on, sometimes it's just fun to meddle. Classic Doctor Who review time, and as voted on by my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, go check it out. Lots of things you can get there. Yeah, I'll plug it again at the tail end. You'd think I'd not do it because I did it at the front, but yeah, I'm gonna shill. But I'm doing it for me. But anyway, as my patronizers selected, it's time for not only a First Doctor story, but a pretty well regarded one as well. And that is the Time Meddler. So, this is another one that I have seen before, but have not seen in quite a while. So, a couple things about this. This is the last episode of the second season of the original run of the show. So, this is kind of tail-endish for William Hartnell's run. He had season 3 after this, but basically, the decision would have been made somewhat after this would have been shot to have the next one be his last season. I don't know exactly how the timing worked out. Maybe it happened during the shooting of the next season, but this is a case where watching this episode, you can see why they would have felt that was necessary, and that's something that I'll come back to. But in any case, we have the Doctor, and he lands in Northumbria with two companions who I'm actually not familiar with outside of the story, Vicky and Stephen. And this is Stephen's first trip actually in the TARDIS, to the point that he actually does not believe that it is a time machine. He spends the first 2 complete episodes. It's not until the 3rd out of 4 episodes that he finally admits, yeah, okay, it's a time machine. But anyway, they land there, and this is sort of right on the cusp of a Viking invasion, and this is a major point in history, and again, it sort of betrays the early intentions of Doctor Who to be a more flatly educational program, as there are a number of points where characters, the Doctor usually just sort of stops and lays out, oh yes, this is about to happen, and that results in this, and this, oh yes, very interesting. And since I mentioned sort of Hartnell's performance there, I'll say that he is a lot more lovable in this than he was, earlier in the run of the show. He's a lot more mischievous. He's a lot more kind of joyous in what he does. He seems to be having more fun. He's still a bit grumpy. Anyway, they get there and, they're just kind of exploring about, because at this point, the Doctor really can't control where the TARDIS lands at all. So they're just sort of seeing what's going on. And there's a monastery. There's a village that they encounter, but there's a monastery up on the hill. And there's a monk. Supposedly there's a whole bunch of them. People hear Gregorian chants sort of coming down. Maybe it's not Gregorian. I'm not going to look up what kind of chanting it would have been. But they hear those chants come down, and they assume, oh, there's a bunch of monks up there. Well, no, it's just the one. And he's got a recording of monks singing. And he is luring the Viking fleet to land here as opposed to where they're historically supposed to land, and then intending to wipe them all out in order to alter the course of history. So the monk, who is never identified as anything other than a time meddler or just the monk, and so he's sort of known in fandom circles at this point as the meddling monk. And he is a Time Lord. They're not called Time Lords yet. That name doesn't get said until Troughton's time. But it is acknowledged that he is from the same place that the Doctor came from. Actually, from the Doctor's future. He says that the monk is from about 50 years forward in time from when he comes from. And the Doctor, while he is reluctant to admit it, is very clear that he understands that this guy's got a better TARDIS than he has. So the Doctor obviously puts his foot down. He's like, I'm not going to let you do this. And then, we go from there. Now, I do, in some ways, I'm kind of spoiling a bit because some of the stuff that I talked about doesn't really get revealed until like episode 3. And, and it was stuff that was obviously meant to be a gradual reveal. You're like, something's off with the monk. But the thing is, at this point, not only is the story so well known, but like any basic, like just pitch synopsis mentions the fact that the monk is a time traveler. So even though the original intention for people watching for the first time is that you wouldn't know that, I think pretty much at this point everybody does. So what have we got going on here? Well, we've got these new companions, and they're decent. Especially Stephen for a first outing. He's got that sort of, well, I know what's going on around here. But, he can also admit when he's wrong, eventually. He's a little bit condescending to Vicky, and Vicky is, for the most part, a little bit more clever than him. He doesn't seem to recognize that. The Doctor, as I said, is very enjoyable in this. He's got that twinkle in his eye going a bit more at this point, but as I mentioned, it is pretty clear that they were really having to work around Hartnell's physical and mental condition at this point. Because there's long stretches where he doesn't appear. He doesn't appear in the second episode at all. Like, we hear his voice, but he doesn't appear in that episode, and there's a fair number of points in scenes where it's very clear that the other actors are, if not directly feeding him lines, prompting him probably more than the script would normally call for. In the way that, if you've ever seen if you've ever seen improv acting exercises, the way someone might try and lead someone down a certain story path, like, oh, you mean this thing? And the Doctor's like, yes, that. And like, he'll add a little bit more, but it's very clear that he's not retaining the information, and he's needing these extra promptings, and it's making some of the dialogue and some of the scenes a little awkward, a little repetitive, a little redundant. And it is a shame because, as I said, you can tell he's having more fun with the part than he was when it started. But it's hard to argue that it wasn't the right call to replace him after the following season, because you can really start to see the issues. It's not just like one flubbed word or one sort of, he misses like a little bit or repeats part of a line while he's saying it. Like, it happens a lot in this story, and it's kind of sad in a way. The monk is actually a fairly interesting character, and he's also one of those characters that Classic Who fans have a tendency to go, why has that character never come back? And honestly, I'm not entirely sure why. I think he's interesting as a rogue Time Lord, because as far as rogue Time Lords go, like, he's basically one of 4 that we know much about. Because there's the Doctor, obviously. You could count Susan, I suppose. But there's the Doctor, the Master, the Ronnie, and the Monk. And they all kind of have slightly different MOs. And what I like about the Monk is that he does seem to at least claim, and possibly even believe, some sort of altruistic purpose behind what he's doing. Saying how if he does this, and this person gets to rule instead of who history says was supposed to, then all this other stuff will be prevented. All these good things will happen. He's improving history, or that's his argument. And while the episode doesn't draw attention to this, like, I call BS on that, but not in a, like, I'm saying this to hide my true intentions way, but in, like, I think this guy's fooling himself. Because his TARDIS is full of all these artifacts. He's just been collecting stuff that he thinks is cool and fun. And he talks about how he has fun doing this. I think he has rationalized, oh, well, I do it for the greater good. Or he does it because he wants to. He does it because he enjoys it. He does it because he gets cool souvenirs. But he has rationalizations for why he does what he does. and he's buying into them pretty decently. And I think that makes for actually surprisingly developed character. The rest of the supporting cast is solid as far as the Vikings and the Saxons and all that. They're fine. They're fairly stock for what we've gotten, especially a lot of these early seasons of Doctor Who, in terms of, the village, the sort of natives of the time. And, there's always someone who's like really skeptical. I don't trust these outsiders. And, there's a little power struggle. There's it's functional is what it is. It's not particularly exceptional. The fights were actually surprisingly harsh. Not that they were actually like well choreographed fights, because they weren't. But, it's like with axes and swords, and these people are dead after they fight a lot of times. So that was kind of surprising. And it does look good. As is true as of, I think, most black and white Doctor Who, it looks good. And I mentioned this before. Black and white covers a lot of sins. And when you don't have to match colors or account for things like that, and it's just a lot more forgiving. And the money that they had to make the show with stretches a little bit farther and makes it a little bit more believable, I think, back in the black and white days than it was once it went to color. So I'll talk a little bit about the very end, and this would constitute a proper, like a real legitimate spoiler. So if you haven't seen this before and you care, check it out. I do recommend it. So I really do like the way that the Doctor strands the monk. And the thing is, he does strand him. I was going to say defeats the monk, but, he defeats him just by ensuring he doesn't get to do what he pulled off. But he goes a step farther. He's like, no, I'm not going to let this guy do anything like this ever again. And he disables, I forget exactly what the monk calls it, something about the interdimensional something or other, technobabble thing, of his ship, so that when the monk tries to get back inside, because it's a small entrance, but you get inside, then you can stand up because it's bigger on the inside. He tries to get inside, and the inside is now the size that it would be for given how small the outer shell of his TARDIS is currently appearing. The Doctor broke the bigger on the inside bit. And that's actually something that's kind of been revisited in New Era Doctor Who, like in Name of the Doctor, the Doctor's TARDIS, without the Doctor, slowly dying, just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger because the bigger on the inside is leaking out. What the Doctor does to the monk's TARDIS is kind of the inverse of that. Just shrink the inside down to the size that it would have to be to fit in what the outer shell is. And I think that's a pretty clever way to do it, in terms of defeating this guy, making sure he can't do anything worse. But, also just, you have the means to continue to live. This isn't a death sentence for you, but no, traveling days are done, buddy. So I think that's about it. It's a pretty breezy 4-parter. There's not nearly as much sort of plot and story as I would have thought to it. But Hartnell, despite his, very clearly deteriorating ability to keep up, is really on point in the performance. So it is still worth seeing, and the monk is good. The plot's pretty just basic as far as these sort of historical things go. Preserve history. We got to be sure it happens the way that it's supposed to. But this was sort of the first major wrinkle like this in the historical stories, I think, as opposed to them just being straight historicals. I say I think because every time I say that about a classic who actually it was this episode, because I don't do research. We'll wrap it up there. The Meddling Monk. It was good to revisit. I like this one. So what do you think of it if you've seen it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff to do. Buttons, links. I mentioned the Patreon. I'm mentioning it again. Every bit of support helps. But there's other stuff to check out down there as well. Give it a look if you feel like it. And if you don't, that is okay. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. And I am just running the meetings. Until next time, this council is adjourned.